to do something very, very, very important. You're just here. You're not actually a part of this discussion. I am going to contemplate which Hyrule I would want to live in. Well, that doesn't entirely cover the whole entire scope. Basically, any of the worlds that appear in Zelda games, but you know, it's mostly Hyrules, some non-Hyrules. For the format, I thought that in honor of the football postseason coming to a conclusion, well, not really, but we know who the final competitors are. I don't know. I just decided that we're going to do the tournament style. So each world is going to face off, and I'm going to discuss them with myself and choose the Hyrule that I would most like to live in. Now, unfortunately, I actually have not played every single Zelda game. The Zelda games that I have played, like the ones that I really like, I've played multiple times. Anyway, but some of them I have not played, and some of the ones that I have played I haven't necessarily finished. So, I have not played Spirit Tracks. I think I played Phantom Hourglass, but I didn't get to finish it. I played Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, but it's been a while, and I never finished them. They were too hard for me. And I played Link's Awakening because I had it on a Game Boy Color, but I recently played the sort of remade one, and I really enjoyed it, so I have that in my mind for a reference, but for some of them I am going to have to do a little bit of research and speculate as to what they hold, because either I don't remember or I don't really know. Okay, so I had a version or like some kind of rule of how I was having them face off to start with. Something where it's like, you know, do the first one and the last one, but then I miscounted. At first I included Minish Cap, but then I realized that that's kind of just the same world as Link to the Past, and so that doesn't really make sense to me. But anyway, so I'm not including the Minish Cap anymore. You know what? You can just follow along. So, our first round, round one, is Spirit Tracks versus Adventures of Link. So, I do have the maps ready to go. Spirit Tracks, unfortunately, we're going to start right off with one I haven't played, so that makes it a little bit more difficult for me to understand what exactly I am undertaking. But it looks like we've got a frozen area, a sort of mountain area, a woodland area, and an oceanic area. And we have train travel. And I love the idea of train travel. Don't get to do it much. So I really like that idea. I like that we have variety of terrains, but what my concern always is, are there various towns to visit? Because I mean, if you're going to be living somewhere, if you're going to be living in a world or a country, you want there to be more than one town, more than one community, and I'm having trouble because I haven't played it. This is kind of really an unfair one. Just I like the train aspect. I haven't played it, so I don't know what all of the communities look like. Adventures of Link, or Zelda 2, has some palaces, it has some homes, it has Saria. I always said Saria. Anyway, as a town, it has Naburu as a town. This is really funny how they brought these names back. It's a lot of, because it's like the palaces and then just sort of freestanding buildings, areas. I mean, we're coming off of the original Zelda, which is just like wilderness. But because this still has multiple towns, and it does have it has a mountain area, different islands. It's got red mountains, and then it's got gray mountains. That's great. I think for round one, I am going to choose Adventures of Link. Alright, round two is Phantom Hourglass versus Link to the Past. I don't have to think too much about this one. Phantom Hourglass, from what I remember, is you're on your boat and you go around in a bunch of little islands, and I don't think they're quite as interesting or involved as the islands in Wind Waker. Link to the Past is still that kind of wilderness, not a lot of communities. It's got Kakariko Village. Again, you know, these are pronunciations that I formed when I was 6, and I never heard anybody else say anything. It has that. What else does it have? It kind of just has Kakariko Village. It's got the castle, different terrains. I still think, just because I'm not sure how I would handle living in an area where it's just a bunch of little islands, because I'm not used to it, you know. It makes me less acclimated, and therefore it's more scary, and it doesn't feel as much like home. So I'm gonna go with Link to the Past. Alright, round 3 is Twilight Princess versus Link's Awakening. This one's really easy. Unfortunately, I didn't. Here's what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to just rule out all of the 2D overhead games, but I mean, Link's Awakening, it's just what, Koholint Island, and there's 2 villages. I mean, at least it has 2, right? And a couple of other just people living out in the middle of nowhere, essentially. And there's not a lot to do in the towns. And then you have Twilight Princess. And Twilight Princess Hyrule is beautiful. You've got Ordon Village, you've got Castletown, you've got Kakariko Village, which is not at the height of its abundance, but it's also right next to Death Mountain, which has the Goron community, and then there's Zora's Domain. And I think what I like is that it feels like the different communities live there, and so there's different places to go, and there's different people to talk to, and there's different shops to visit, and Twilight Princess feels lived in, if that makes sense. And it's fresh in my mind because I've been playing it. So it's Twilight Princess. I think Twilight Princess is going to go far. That's my prediction, but I don't know. I have to think about it. But for round 3, it's Twilight Princess. Okay, round 4 is Skyward Sword versus Ocarina of Time. I'm gonna be honest with you people. I haven't played the remastered Switch version, and I only played Skyward Sword once. Played it once, finished it once, and I think since it came out 12 years ago, I've had the urge to replay it once, and I moved past that urge and I didn't do it. But that doesn't necessarily have any bearing on the world that you could live in. And so essentially there's one community, there's Skyloft, which is fun. I do like Skyloft. Skyloft is interesting, but it's like they just have like the Night Academy and then the Bazaar. It's like, what do you do? I need to be gentler on Skyward Sword. I recently found out it's my oldest nephew's favorite Zelda game. I don't know why, but I was kind of ragging on it. But he's like, oh man, that's one of my favorites. And so I said, oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't want to beat it up too much, but he said it was fine and that I can express my opinion freely. So that was very kind of him. In Skyward Sword, when you're on the ground, are there communities? There's the little kiwis. Are they called kiwis? The little, which are cute, the little cute things. But you don't really, are there people? I just remember being frustrated a lot, so that may have blocked some things. Frustrated and scared from those trials. So basically, ultimately, Skyward Sword is essentially, as far as a living space goes, it's Skyloft. That's my choice. I like Skyloft. Do I want to be in the sky? No, I don't. I'm afraid of heights. Even if you have a bird, I'm afraid of heights. So, I just complained about Skyward Sword and I didn't even talk about Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is a lovely, lovely place. And again, we have multiple communities. So you have Kokiri Forest and you have Kakariko Village, and you have the Hyrule Castle town, even though when you're older, it's it's completely demolished, but we're going to be kind of going by the nice version. Goron City feels like a community where people live. Zora's Domain feels like a community where people live. Gerudo Fortress, it is a community where people live. It's a fortress, so it's not the homiest place in the world. But again, we have multiple biomes and we have multiple communities. It's very pretty. There's a variety. You can go to Lake Hylia, which is nice. It does not have ocean access. I understand that. Some Hyrules or other Zelda lands have ocean access, and you don't have that in Ocarina of Time, but I can forego that. And so I already knew this, but I'm just over explaining it. The winner is Ocarina of Time. Alright, round 5, Wind Waker versus Oracle of Seasons. Okay, so Wind Waker, we again have a bunch of little islands, but some of them are pretty interesting. And we have multiple communities. That's a big thing for me, apparently. Which wouldn't it be? Different kinds of communities makes it more interesting. And then Oracle of Seasons is... Just 1 second. Holodrum. Where's our main town? Horon Village. There's Horon Village and Goron Village. That's a choice. So we have our main village, and it has a Deku tree. It has a version of the Deku tree. We like that. It's got Goron Mountain. It's a nice space. It's an interesting area, but unfortunately we're seeing a lack of communities, and that is the sad part of these, the Game Boy games and the early 2D games. And I realized that they were limited. So I'm not saying that these worlds are bad or inferior. It's just if you're gonna live someplace, unless you want to live in the wilderness, because that would be the equivalent of this being in real life. So I know that I said that I wouldn't be good living on a bunch of small islands, but I really like the islands where people do live. Anyway, I really like the Wind Waker Island, so Wind Waker wins this round. Alright, Majora's Mask versus Oracle of Ages. Now, Oracle of Ages is, I think, a pretty similar overworld to Oracle of Seasons. No fooling. It's a lot woodsier, isn't it? They do have a Zora village. Lina City. But, so Majora's Mask always feels a little perilous to me. It's just sort of a frightening game. But if you sort of take that element out, you have Clock Town, which is really cool, but unlike Skyward Sword where it's Skyloft and that's it. The Southern Swamp, it has the Deku Palace, right? Which is where the Dekus live, though it doesn't feel as much like a community. I guess I like when you're in a village or a town or whatever, and there's different buildings for different things. There's a shop, or there's a doctor, or there's a game, which the Deku Palace doesn't have. And I guess they're all kind of like that. Other than Clock Town, all of the different communities just have sort of their one hub. But has ocean access. I don't know. No, I do know. Majora's Mask wins. We're going with Majora's Mask. Termina, or I always said Terminia, but there's not that extra I in there, so I guess it's just Termina? Majora's Mask World. That's what we're going with. Okay, it's time for Breath of the Wild versus Legend of Zelda. And I'm trying to think, does Legend of Zelda have any communities? Does it have anything? When I was looking for maps, I couldn't find anything except for just the Overworld map, but that doesn't have any labels. And from what I remember playing, you go into some caves and you find some old guys. There are no communities. You are really... Talk about being in the wild. Do they even have a castle? I don't even know if there's a castle. I don't even think there's a castle. You're just thrown into the absolute wilderness. Completely. And Breath of the Wild, which is, I mean, Breath of the Wild is absolutely gorgeous. They really outdid themselves in creating a world that you want to explore. And again, multiple communities. How many do we have? So we have Kakariko Village, Tenno Village, Goron, they call it Goron Village or Goron City? Zora's Domain, Rito Village, Lula, the Beach Village. I feel like I'm missing one. No. Gerudo Town. 7. It's actually 10 places to go. I forgot Karakara Bazaar, Terrytown, and Korok Forest. And the beach town is Lurelin, which I couldn't seem to remember. It's a lot of places to go. And of course, I mean, they have just people living out and about, which is really cool. Again, it's hard sometimes to compare things because they were so limited. And Legend of Zelda, it's actually a funny comparison because Legend of Zelda, the original one, I think it was the same way where you could choose which temples you went to. It wasn't a linear line, you know, you didn't have to do level 1, level 2, level 3. And so it's like Breath of the Wild is finally what the original Zelda wanted to be, which they did it. And now we have the new one coming out, finally. Alright, obviously Breath of the Wild wins. Did I make a mistake again? I made a mistake. Okay, Breath of the Wild is getting a bye. Why am I like this? I can't do a simple task. Okay, so that's the end of the full round. What do they call it? It's like the whole thing is round 1, but then all of the different matches. I should have been calling them matches, maybe. Anyway, that concludes round 1. Round 2, match 1. We have Adventures of Link versus Link to the Past. I think it's going to be a pretty definitive line in the sand for me. If an overworld, if a living location of my choice has multiple communities or not. And I feel like a rotten person, but I think if I'm reading the map correctly, because I haven't played Adventures of Link, if I'm reading the map correctly, Adventures of Link does have multiple communities. Would I really choose it over Link to the Past like that though? Obviously not as a game. We're not talking about that. I'm gonna look at the maps again. Maps are my best friend. How I love maps. Got multiple palaces. And then little... I mean, if like Mido and Rauru and Honosaria, if these are towns, there are a bunch of little towns. They're small. They're there. Small but there. And what does Link to the Past have? This is not based on game. But because of the multiple communities... Maybe this should just be called which Zelda game has the most communities. In which case Breath of the Wild is gonna win. Once we get a little bit, I think in the next round we're really gonna talk about enjoying the space and not just how many communities there are. But right now, okay, for the winner of this match is gonna be Adventures of Link. Match 2, Twilight Princess versus Ocarina of Time. Another video I want to make is sort of ranking all of the communities, living locations, towns, whatever, in all of the Zelda games. And I like a lot of these. The thing about Twilight Princess though, if you were living somewhere, the areas feel more connected, whereas in Ocarina of Time, just places kind of seem to coexist. There's the sense that Zelda and, you know, what Zelda does or doesn't do in Twilight Princess affects the rest of the kingdom, and there seems to be a bit more interaction with, you know, the Zoras and Zora's domain, crossing paths with things that have Castletown, the same with the Gorons, and like some of the Gorons coming and setting up shop in Castletown. And even, you know, you're in Ordon Village when you start, and you're going to take the sword and shield sort of as tribute or whatever to Hyrule Castle. And so it feels like a connected land. And the way that locations are discussed and the way that travel is discussed and the bridges that have been built to connect all of the different areas, it feels much more communal. Even though we have a bunch of separate communities, they all feel much more connected. Whereas in Ocarina of Time, they're a bit more, that's your spot, I acknowledge you, but we're over here, you're over there, and we don't really interact much. So I'm gonna go with Twilight Princess because it feels more unified. Even though they are separate and interesting communities, they're more connected with each other. So, Twilight Princess. Wins! Match 3. Wind Waker versus Majora's Mask. Versus... Which this is kind of funny because we have our WW and our NM, and they're the mirror versions of each other. Ah, so funny. So... Wind Waker, again, we're in the ocean. I'm not equipped to navigate the ocean, but would I live on Outset Island? Yes. Would I live on Windfall Island? Yes. I love Windfall Island. Dragon Roost Island with the Rito, like I wouldn't want to necessarily live there. It's you're just kind of in this big rock cave, and if you don't have wings, you're kind of at a disadvantage. Though there's that part-time guy who gets a job there. He does okay, but you had to help him get it there anyway, didn't you? Anyway, that's irrelevant. Would I want to live with the Rito people? Yes. They seem like a very nice people to live with, but I wouldn't want to live on that island. So, but I really like Outside Island, and I really like Windfall Island. In Majora's Mask, I love Clocktown. It's very busy, and strangely, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of living going on. There's a lot of working going on, but not a lot of living. And that's a slight deterrent, honestly, like thinking about it. I'd love to go to Clocktown, but would I want to live in Clocktown? I mean, in a realistic setting, it probably would be, you know, those buildings that you can't get into, they are homes. It's all very close together, though. All very close together. And then, would I want to live in any of the other locations? Because again, none of the communities in Majora's Mask feel as much like a town or a village that have separate buildings, facilities, housing. I wouldn't want to live in the swamp because it's swampy. I don't generally consider myself an ocean person, but the Great Bay Coast is... Oh, it's not an ocean though, it's a bay, isn't it? But it's still salt water, right? It's still salt water. It has to be. All bays are salt water. Anyway, it's a nice area. I haven't discussed Icona Canyon much, which is funny because it does have separate buildings and it feels a bit more like a traditional town or village, but everybody's dead, and so I have to reimagine it as a place where people actually live. I think I'm going to choose Wind Waker, actually. I've sort of surprised myself because I've always adored Clocktown, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't like how it always feels like it's just a location for a festival and it's just a place to work. Like it's just work is everywhere. It's like a business district that takes up the entire town. And I don't want to live in that. And then none of the other living locations feel, they don't have enough facilities. I don't know how to put it. You know what I mean though. You have to know what I mean. Whereas at least with even Windfall Island or Outset Islands, or even just choosing an island to live on in the Great Sea, not ideal, but I mean, you would have a boat. I could live on one of the islands that's somewhere in between Outset Island and Windfall Island. It feels like there's more living going on, even though everything is technically way less connected. Anyway, the winner is Wind Waker. Round 3. I have a feeling where this is going, and I'm not surprised, and it will be a discussion that I will have to discuss with myself. Okay, so match 1, we have Adventures of Link versus Twilight Princess. This matchup I didn't see coming, but because of the way things were matched up with Adventures of Link, that's why it's gotten this far. Like, obviously, I would rather live in Ocarina of Time Hyrule over Adventures of Link Hyrule, but it's just not the way that things lined up with the way that I had people face off. So, we have Adventures of Link versus Twilight Princess. You want to guess what I'm going to choose? I already know the answer. The answer is Twilight Princess. For the reasons that I discussed before. There's not even much more to say. It's just Twilight Princess. Match 2, Wind Waker versus Breath of the Wild. So, this should be easy for me, right? And it should be, and it is. I know what I'm going to choose. But I think I've always really liked Windfall Island. Which, you know what's funny? How I was saying about Clocktown, how it just feels like a business district, when Windfall Island is literally like the Merchant's Island. I think they call it that at some point. But it just feels like more living is going on there. I don't know, maybe because they have a school. So, you know, it's not just a business, there's a school. And there are just people around who don't seem like they are merchants, I guess. But to consider the whole of the overworld from either game, I mean, Breath of the Wild has so much going for it. It's got your different areas, you know, your snowy mountains, it's got the desert, it's got the ocean, it's got the woods and the forests. It's even got autumn forests that are perpetually autumnal. And it's got a volcano and a castle. I mean, what's really going to be interesting is in the new Breath of the Wild, like, what are we going to see? Is there going to be like rebuilt Hyrule? Is it going to be more intense? If I think about it too much, I'm going to get too hyped up. And I don't want to be hyped up. I try to be very unhyped these days. But at this moment, I am going to hype the adequate amount for the idea of living in Breath of the Wild Hyrule. And now, final round. This doesn't surprise me at all. It's Twilight Princess versus Breath of the Wild. And you want to know what it comes down to in this moment. Remember how I was saying before, like Twilight Princess, the different communities to towns, they feel a bit more unified to me when I was comparing it to Ocarina of Time. That still stands. It's a difficult comparison because Breath of the Wild, you are in a Hyrule that's kind of going through a hard time, or it's like it's just recovering from its hard time. The scars of war have not healed and there's still a lot of bad stuff going on, so everything feels disjointed and separate, and the effort to go from one community to the next is palpable. There aren't a lot of people traveling, and if there are, it feels like people who can do it alone, have as little as possible, and just travel somewhere. So it's a little demolished. There are certain communities in Breath of the Wild that I would love to live in, and probably the version of Hyrule before Calamity struck, that probably felt a lot more connected. And I think I really like that sense of connection. And maybe I'm overblowing the connection that I feel in Twilight Princess, But I have just been playing it, so I can't be making it up that much because I'm actually in the middle of it. And I didn't just choose Twilight Princess because that's what I've been playing, because I also just go into Breath of the Wild and just to walk around. Because it's gorgeous. It's not that it's not beautiful. Like, I love it. I like to just go. But you have to be a certain kind of person to live in the Breath of the Wild Hyrule as it is in the Breath of the Wild game. And I'm not that kind of person. So I just think that realistically I'd be better off in Twilight Princess Hyrule, which I know they're going through a hard time too, but it's not as far gone as I feel Breath of the Wild is. Okay, that's it. I will see you next time. So long.